There are moments in sport, in competition, in the long and dramatic history of human beings testing themselves against one another that feel almost impossible to believe, even as they are happening. Moments where someone arrives from nowhere, from complete obscurity, and defeats the best in the world at something that is supposed to take decades to master. Moments that rewrite the understood rules about who can win, who deserves to win, and what winning at the highest level actually requires. The story of Peter Eastgate is one of those moments. And if you have never heard his name, or if you know it only vaguely from a headline you half remember, then you need to sit down and hear this story properly. Because what this young Danish kid did in Las Vegas in 2008 was not just remarkable, it was the kind of thing that people who have spent their entire lives in the poker world still talk about with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Before we get into this, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and smash the like button, because this is the kind of story you won't hear anywhere else. To understand what Peter Eastgate achieved, you first need to understand what he walked into. The World Series of Poker main event is not simply a poker tournament, it is the tournament. It is the event that every serious poker player on the planet circles on their calendar, saves their bankroll for, and dreams about winning from the moment they first pick up a deck of cards. It is held every summer in Las Vegas. It draws thousands of entrants from dozens of countries, and it carries with it a level of prestige that no other poker event in the world can match. The buy-in is $10,000, the field is enormous, and the competition, particularly at the later stages of the tournament, is ferociously, brutally difficult. Because while luck plays a role in any individual hand, across the hundreds of hours required to reach the final table, the best players in the world tend to find their way to the top. The 2008 main event drew over 6,000 players. Among them were seasoned professionals with decades of experience, players who had spent their careers studying the game with an obsessive intensity that most people reserve for academic or scientific pursuits, players who had won millions of dollars at the felt and had the scars and the wisdom that only come from years of high-stakes competition. And somewhere in that field, sitting down at a table in the Rio All-Suite Hotel and Casino, was a 22-year-old from Odense, Denmark, who had barely been playing serious poker for a handful of years, and whose name meant absolutely nothing to anyone in the room. Peter Eastgate was born in 1985. He grew up in Denmark in circumstances that were comfortable but not remarkable. A young man with a sharp mind and a competitive instinct who discovered poker in his late teens, and became, with quiet and unassuming determination, very good at it. He played online extensively, which was the training ground of his generation. The digital tables where millions of hands could be played in a fraction of the time available at live games, where pattern recognition developed rapidly and strategic thinking was sharpened against a constant variety of opponents. He had some live tournament experience by the time he arrived in Las Vegas in 2008. He was not a complete unknown to everyone, but in the context of the World Series main event, in the context of what he was about to attempt, he was as close to an outsider as it is possible to be. What happened over the days and weeks of that tournament is the kind of narrative that screenwriters would be told to make more believable. Eastgate navigated the enormous field with a combination of technical skill, psychological composure, and an ability to make critical decisions under pressure that belied his age and his experience level. He read opponents correctly. He managed his chips with discipline. He picked his spots with patience. And when aggression was required, when the moment called for him to push all his chips into the middle and dare someone to call him, he did it with a calmness that more experienced players found unsettling. One by one, the field thinned. The thousands became hundreds, the hundreds became dozens, and eventually the dozens became 9. The November 9, the final table of the 2008 World Series of Poker main event, was held separately from the rest of the tournament, a scheduling innovation designed to build drama and television audience. And when the world got its first extended look at the final 9 players who would compete for the championship, the name Peter Eastgate did not generate the kind of buzz that surrounded some of the other finalists. There were players at that table with longer resumes, bigger reputations, and more experience in exactly these kinds of high-pressure situations. The consensus among poker analysts and commentators was the final table play only confirmed what was already known. The final table play only confirmed what those who had watched Eastgate throughout the tournament had suspected, that there was something different about this young man's relationship with pressure. Where other players tightened up, where the weight of what was at stake seemed to affect decision-making in ways subtle but measurable, Eastgate appeared almost serene. He was not reckless. He was not making the kind of splashy, gambling plays that sometimes characterize young players trying to make a name for themselves. He was playing fundamentally sound, strategically sophisticated poker, and doing it with a consistency that gradually, methodically eliminated his opponents. The heads-up match, the final confrontation between Eastgate and Ivan Demidov, a Russian player who had made an extraordinary run through the field himself, was a masterclass in composed, calculated aggression. Demidov was not a pushover. He was experienced, dangerous, and fighting for the same prize with the same hunger. But Eastgate outplayed him. Not dramatically, not in a single hand that everyone points to as the decisive moment, but steadily, over the course of a long and grinding confrontation, through an accumulation of good decisions that gradually shifted the chip counts until there was no way back. When the final hand was played and Peter Eastgate emerged victorious, the numbers were almost surreal. He won $9,634,000. $9 million. For a 22-year-old from Odense who had been playing serious poker for just a few years. He also received the gold bracelet that is the iconic symbol of World Series supremacy, the physical object that every poker player who has ever seriously competed for it would understand the weight of. He became, at that moment, the youngest player in history to win the World Series of Poker main event. The youngest. In the history of the entire tournament, the poker world responded with the particular combination of awe and analysis that the community reserves for results it needs to process. Was it skill? Of course there was skill. No one navigates a field of over 6,000 players and defeats elite competition at the final table through luck alone. But how much of it was the specific convergence of circumstance and timing that allows a young player with less experience than his opponents to beat them before the weight of that experience advantage has time to fully assert itself? These debates will never be entirely resolved, which is part of what makes the story so endlessly interesting. Eastgate himself has always been thoughtful and honest in discussing his win, neither dismissive of the luck component, nor falsely modest about the skill and preparation he brought to the table. What happened next is, in some ways, the most interesting part of the story, because Peter Eastgate did not become the kind of figure that his victory seemed to set him up to be. He did not become a fixture on the professional tournament circuit, grinding out results and building a career at the top of the poker world. Instead, he stepped back, significantly and deliberately back. He sold the bracelet, an act that generated considerable controversy and commentary in the poker community, since the bracelet is generally treated as the most sacred of trophies, the one thing a champion never parts with. Eastgate sold it at auction for a charitable cause, which reframed the act somewhat, but it remained a striking statement about his relationship with what he had won and what it represented. He spoke in interviews about the psychological difficulty of processing what had happened to him, about the strange experience of achieving, at 22, something that most people spend entire careers chasing and never reach, about the pressure that came with the title, the expectations, the attention, and the particular loneliness of having peaked so young at something so public. He pulled away from poker, from the spotlight, from the identity that his victory had thrust upon him, and chose a quieter life. He invested his winnings thoughtfully. He built a life outside the casino. He became, in the most deliberate way possible, a former poker champion rather than a current one. There's something in that choice that deserves more attention than it typically receives when his name comes up. Because in a culture that worships the chase and the win and the accumulation of more, Peter Eastgate's decision to take his extraordinary achievement and simply live with it, not leverage it, not build a brand around it, not chase the next title and the next payday, is its own kind of statement about what success actually means, about what enough looks like, about what it means to win the biggest prize in your world before you are old enough to fully understand what you wanted it for. He was 22 years old. He walked into the biggest poker tournament on earth. He beat everyone in the room, and then he walked away. That, in the end, might be the most remarkable thing he ever did. If this video inspired you, blew your mind, or just reminded you that sometimes the most unexpected people change the game forever, hit the like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe if you haven't already. We cover the stories that go deeper than the headlines. I'll see you in the next one.